Oh, that's okay. All right. So, engaging a community of practice for English language learners. Um, my name is Sarah Cassidy. I completed my B.Ed at USask, and just like the other people that you have listened to today, also did my post-degree certificate in EAL teaching here as well. I currently teach high school EAL at Edie High School, so with our Greater Saskatoon Catholic School Division. And I'm really passionate about advocating for EAL students and building self advocacy skills and supporting their complex needs. And I just included some pictures here of a project we did at the start of the year that was focused on social justice. So last year, I did something similar in a fair type of setup where students were in groups and they got to teach about their culture and they really loved it. And it was an opportunity for them to connect with Canadian students and their teachers and be able to share something about their culture. And then this year, my partner teacher, the other half of our EAL department, and I decided how can we kind of dig deeper into our students' cultural identity. And they really loved the idea of a social justice fair. So they got to share about their culture and their country, but also got to talk about issues that are important to them and things that they wanted other people to know about their country. So these are just a couple pictures from that. Just another area of EAL that I'm really interested in right now. And the students also all created pages of a zine, a little magazine that we ended up, hello, welcome, that we ended up getting printed for that too. So I just, I love my role as an EAL teacher, and yeah, it's kind of a dream job for me. And I'm curious because I would like this to be as like practical as possible. So I'm just interested in who I'm speaking with because some people look really familiar. Can I ask how many people here are classroom teachers? Okay, yeah, or EAL teachers, any EAL teachers? Cool. Education students? Yeah, okay, awesome. And can I ask if you haven't, hello, welcome. If you have an learning assistance or administration, or I'm just curious, yeah. Central office. Okay, awesome. Welcome. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Welcome. Hi. That is okay. Thanks for joining. I was just introducing myself and I wanted to try to make this as a kind of practical and applicable to people as possible. So I was just kind of learning a little bit more about where everyone's coming from. So obviously, we're all professionals and there will maybe be lots, I'm sure, of knowledge here that maybe we already know. But I'm happy that you're spending this time with me. To hear my presentation. So this is what my focus for the next 50-ish minutes will be. And it's the idea that right now, obviously, we're seeing increased English language learner enrollment and limited employment of teacher specialists. And of course, this isn't unique to just EAL. We're seeing challenges like this just in education in general. But as an EAL teacher, my focus was how can we engage a larger community of practice where we can blend classroom teachers with EAL teacher specialists so that we can better support English language learners in the classroom. So this presentation was made to provide really practical suggestions for how we can establish this community of practice to support our EAL students. I won't spend too much time on this because I'm sure that there are lots of terms that many of us are familiar with. ELL, English language learner. I'll be speaking a lot about inclusion. So just this idea of incorporating ELL students into mainstream classes rather than limiting them only to sheltered EAL instruction. If you just joined, I am a high school EAL teacher. I did a little bit of elementary EAL, but that's kind of the context that a lot of my examples will come from, will be secondary EAL. So when I talk about sheltered classes, I'm referring to classes that are composed entirely of EAL students and taught by an EAL teacher. And for me, that looks like language credit courses, but also, things like History 10 and having a class of EAL students that I'm teaching that to. And when I say mainstream classes or mainstream teachers, I'm just referring to a classroom environment that isn't specifically designed for ELLs. So not a language course or a sheltered course. And community of practice, this was something that I didn't know, a phrase that was kind of new to me before I started this research, but it is just a way to describe a supportive system of professionals to share and learn together. Because as teachers, we want to support our students and we all do the best that we can. And this is just about working together and sharing what we know with each other. So this just kind of gives an idea of what I'll be talking about. I'm going to start with just a little reflection activity. I have a short video. It's very short, but I really love it, and I'm hoping that it can kind of lead into some conversation. I'll start by sharing the current context of EAL learners in our Saskatchewan schools, and yeah, talk a little bit about EAL teachers and how they can collaborate with classroom teachers as well. So my reflection, I'm going to start with a story that when it happened to me was kind of what led me down the path of creating this project and focusing my research in this direction. I'm just gonna tell you a story and ask you some questions just for you to kind of like think about and reflect on, and we'll come back to it later. So I stand outside the classroom door with a new student who has recently arrived from Ukraine. And today is his first day at our school. And I've taken him to the next class that the counselor has chosen for his schedule. And the classroom teacher comes to the door and asks me, "Is he one of your kids? How is his English? I have too much going on today to take him." So, just as I did, yeah, I'm seeing the like, just as I did at the time that this happened, I tried to pause. Um, and I'm sure as teachers or working in education, we can imagine like putting yourself in the shoes of this new student and how this is affecting you emotionally, right? How does that make you feel as a new student at a new school in a new country? Then something that at the time, of course, anyone I'm sure can relate to that feeling of being like protectiveness and defensiveness over our students. So this was not something that I was able to do in the moment, and I had to think about a lot later, was trying to put myself then in the shoes of that classroom teacher. And realizing that the reaction that I was getting probably was coming from somewhere, and trying to think about why might a classroom teacher maybe not feel prepared or unwilling or nervous, any number of emotions about letting the student into their classroom, and what kind of professional support do we need to be able to feel confident in doing that. At the time, a question that I asked myself a lot, I was really focused on how that situation made me view my role as an EAL teacher beyond the full course load of classes that I teach students and the role that we have in supporting them. So it gave me a lot to think about. So this is why a community of practice is so important, because it allows us to support each other, to learn from each other, to become more effective educators. Because as frustrated as I felt in that moment, I knew that the teacher that I was speaking with cares about her students, and I know that she wants the best for her students. And just like, yeah, all of us want our students to do well. And it was just, how can we support each other so that we feel good and we feel confident in supporting these students that are some of the most vulnerable. So I am sure. I did parent-teacher interviews this morning, so I didn't get to see all of the presentations in the morning. But I'm not quite sure. Maybe we've already talked about some of these statistics in a few other presentations. But I just updated this. This was a 2024 report from the STF that talked about the increase of EAL enrollment. The number was 70.5% increase from 2013 to 2014 to last school year. And in that same time, the number of EAL teachers decreased. And of course, I'm sure this is not shocking to anyone because we, of course, are seeing not adequate necessarily levels of support, and we feel overwhelmed in all areas of education right now. But focusing on EAL, of course, we are seeing the same. And to put that into kind of a different perspective, when we think about an EAL student to teacher ratio, is a huge increase. So the current number that they gave us was 153 EAL students per one EAL teacher, which of course can lead to a bit of a feeling of overwhelm depending on how many students are on your caseload. So obviously, we have had a lot of discussions just in general about public like funding for public education and just school divisions like not being able to have the opportunity to employ EAL teacher specialists to be able to adequately support the amount of English language learners that are enrolling in these schools, which is why it's so important that we are able to work together because we all have language learners in our classes and we do the best that we can with the resources that we have and being able to share as an EAL teacher anything that I can with a classroom teacher to help them feel more confident with working with those students is so important. Because unfortunately, English language learners aren't always welcomed into the mainstream classroom. I know, of course, because you are all here, you are all people who care about supporting English language learners and learning more about it. But there are definitely some hurdles that ELLs face when going into a mainstream classroom environment because it's very common sometimes for mainstream teachers to disclose that they might find it frustrating or stressful to assess and teach EAL students, which class complexity has been another thing at the forefront of a lot of conversations. And it is understandable that teachers are feeling overwhelmed. When it comes to EAL students specifically, as I was reading through research and conversations with teachers and administrators, and also just speaking with my own coworkers, these were some of the common comments or attitudes around supporting EAL students. One is just, I don't have the time, which when you have a lot of students with complex needs, it can feel overwhelming. Some common feelings were it's frustrating, it's stressful, especially for teachers where it was something they did not have a lot of experience with. This was, I feel like, one of the most common that I came across just from speaking with my own coworkers. Just, I don't feel prepared to effectively work with EAL students, just not knowing. Or, well, once they learn English, then they can join my mainstream classes, which, of course, we know that language acquisition takes a significant amount of time, right? We have all read the studies. Usually they say around like 5 to 8 years, especially when we are considering academic language development. So realistically, waiting until a student is fluent in English before joining the mainstream environment is just not realistic. And we're also going to talk about why it's beneficial for them to be included within mainstream courses. I have also heard this, that differentiating work for EAL students isn't fair to mainstream students. And this is usually, I find, based on a misunderstanding where I've had colleagues that do think, and I've read in research where there's a misunderstanding that EAL content for learners is modified, but it's not. It's adapted. It's differentiated. Right? So it is fair, and in fact, it's differentiating for EAL students is putting them on a more level and fair playing field so that they can have the same opportunities as their peers. And as kind of felt in that very first story that I shared, this is another common feeling, which is just it's not my responsibility to work with EAL students. Which at this point, when we do see how many ELLs we have enrolling and the limited number of resources that we have, in a way, we are all EAL teachers in one form or another. So inclusion of ELLs, and again, I'm sure that there is information here because we have a room full of professionals that we are already familiar with this. So I apologize if I'm repeating something that maybe we are, already familiar with, but we know that language learners benefit when we can pair curricular content with language instruction. And like I mentioned, becoming fluent in English, especially when we consider acquiring academic language, can take a significant amount of time. So as a high school teacher, right, if a student is coming to high school in grade 9, well, we cannot wait 7 years until a student is able to go into a mainstream classroom environment, of course. It is important and it's beneficial for them to be included within mainstream classes. And it's not just a benefit for those students either, it's also a benefit for mainstream students, for Canadian students, because ELLs create a diverse learning environment. And that is just a realistic representation of the world that we are living in. We live and we work and we interact with every day in a globalized world people who have different backgrounds than us. So our classrooms should not look any different from what our lives look like every day. So it benefits ELLs, it benefits all students, and often when looking at differentiation strategies for English language learners, which we'll get into later, they are strategies that really benefit all students as well. So, it cuts off my little cartoon, but it says, I haven't had the chance to learn all of your names yet. I do realize that when, as an EAL teacher, I am talking to my mainstream colleagues, about differentiation and what we can do for ELLs, that most of them already feel like this. I know a lot of my colleagues already feel like they have so many students with so many needs and it can feel overwhelming. So that is my goal, is just to be able to be as helpful as possible and share what I know and also learn from them, because I realize that differentiation, it's hard to even think about that when your day-to-day sometimes feels like this. But that is the whole point of the community of practice, is building the capacity of the whole school. And I've talked a lot about supporting classroom teachers, but not just classroom teachers, teaching aides, administrative staff, just the school environment in general, being able to share and understand the unique experiences of our EAL students, just to build that compassion and empathy and understanding so that we are able to support them the way that we want to support all of our students. So what does that look like? So especially for some of us that are EAL teachers that are in the room, I'm sure these are things that we have all done. So mentorship pairs with EAL teacher specialists, which sounds quite formal, but for me, that looks like trying to find time, maybe during my prep period, going to different classrooms where I know I have students and asking how are they doing, looking at their work, trying to ask what it is that I can do to support those teachers. It can look like any kind of learning opportunity. So even just having a little bit of time at a staff meeting to be able to share information about language acquisition or talk about auditing processes or anything that I can share to be helpful and offer some practical advice to the other people in my building. And just having ongoing communication, discussing student abilities and language goals. An example of this for me is I find speaking with just the other day, one of my coworkers talking about, oh, and the student, like their English is getting like so strong and they're doing so well because their speaking had really like developed. They were on lots of like sports teams where they were meeting more Canadian students and their language was really growing. And they said, yeah, but they're really having trouble in my science class. And I said, well, that student reads at a grade 2 level. And they had no idea, right? Because language learning always requires us to take risks, and it is scary, and students don't always want to admit when they don't understand things, and it can be easy when we feel like that picture before for students to be able to, you know, slide under the radar. So that's why I find it so important to be able to, I'm lucky in my context where we have quite a smaller student population, so it's a little bit more manageable to touch base with different staff members. But those conversations are really important because it's sometimes just little gaps in knowledge and being able to provide just a little bit of background information that can really open up a larger conversation about how to support those students. Okay, so I'm going to show a short video. And I think that it does, personally, I think it does like a really brilliant job of showing the experience of being a language learner in a different environment. And these are just kind of 2 questions to keep in the back of your mind as you're watching, of what challenges the student is facing, but also maybe what challenges the teacher is facing as well.
Going to be hard, but that's all right because we're going to try really hard. Isn't that right, Cameron?
Yes, Miss Peters.
Okay, great. Everyone listen up. So we're going to want to work on we get ours from the answer and the information in the story, okay? We're going to go ahead and test, factual test, and try this actus test. Oh, test your test. Open up. So we're going to page. You go to 3. First on page 3.
¿Qué dijo? ¿A poco va a empezar el examen? No, es una práctica.
We're going to take notes from the story, and we're going to turn it into a math problem, and we're going to walk through it together, okay? So the boy ran 3 blocks. So everyone write 3 blocks.
I didn't even know he looked like a stranger.
How long did it take him to run 3 blocks? Michelle?
6 minutes.
Very good, 6 minutes. All right, so then we take 3 blocks and 6 minutes,
¿Por qué el
right?
niño corre con los bloques? ¿Qué? Sí, ¿por qué el niño corre con los bloques? No,
Okay, so the
corre 3
questions are going to
calles.
go on to ask us, how long will it take him to run 20 blocks? What do we do? How many minutes is that per block?
8 minutes.
Try and remember to raise your hand if you want to answer, okay? No, it's not 8 minutes. Michelle?
18 minutes?
Nope, not 18 minutes. Yes, Enrique?
40?
40, yeah, very good. How'd you get 40?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, 40 is the right answer. How did you get it?
I forgot.
You forgot. Okay. Does anyone know how we get 40? Yes, Moises. Yep, that's right. Very good. Great. Can you tell us how you got that?
40?
Yep, very good. But can you explain to the class what you did here, how you got that?
14.
Okay, all right, you guys, settle down.
I feel so dumb.
Joe, do you want to lose your recess?
No.
Okay, then. Thank you, Moises.
Can you help me, please?
Can you take a walk with me? I don't want you to worry about the test, okay, Moises?
Sí, estoy preocupado sobre el examen. La directora Rosa dijo que todavía tenemos que hacer.
Just try your best, okay? Do you understand? Not importante.
Sí, sí es importante.
You're right, Moises. It is important.
Am I back? That always makes me a little bit emotional. I don't know about anyone else. That video kind of really, yeah. Um, I think it does such an interesting job when we get to be from his point of view, and the only words that we can kind of comprehend are clearly the words that he knows. So you hear like just test, 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 and like he doesn't know the word practice, so you don't hear that. And I think they just did a really brilliant job with that. So this first thing is really like he was facing a lot of challenges. Like, what are some of the challenges that he's facing that I'm sure some of us that work with ELLs see as well? Yes, yeah, no challenges with math, but vocabulary, right? Challenges with vocabulary. He is a good example of a student who self-advocates, which is can be such an important skill to teach and something that students have to learn, especially depending on their understanding or previous experiences with maybe how a student interacts with a teacher, right? So he does do a really good job of advocating for himself. What challenges do you think the teacher is facing?
Understanding him. Like she doesn't understand why he can't communicate. Doesn't understand why he can't explain himself. And she's not sure that he even understands.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, not quite. Because you can it's like we don't assume that it's like, oh, she doesn't care. Like you can tell that she does want him to do well, but that she actually doesn't understand or recognize like what the deficit is in the situation. Totally. Totally. So that kind of comes to, well, what could be done better to support Moises in math class? And when I saw this video for the first time, I loved the example of the guy carrying the blocks because it reminded me of another personal experience where I had a student who was really struggling in math, and I wasn't aware of it until I talked with the classroom teacher. And I said, do you mind if they come and write the test in EAL, and I'll read through some of the questions with them, and if they're able to do it again. And he said, oh, of course, yeah. And they come down, and the first question is asking him to find the volume of a silo, which if you are from Saskatchewan or an agricultural community, we know what a silo is and what shape it is. But the student had no idea where to start. And then as soon as I showed a picture of a silo, they were good to go. They were off. It was just being able to think about it in a different way and not taking that knowledge for granted that I think, yeah, like you said, if that teacher understood what maybe the missing link was, then she would be able to know how to approach it. But if you don't know what the gap is, how do you even start to understand how you approach that gap? So supporting Moises, obviously conferencing with an EAL teacher. So if I was the EAL teacher for Moises, I would want the classroom teacher to know beforehand what the skills he has and the skills he doesn't. What's great about this example with Moises is obviously he is literate in his first language, which is huge. My current context is mostly working with beginner language learners who have experienced little to no or very interrupted education previous to arriving to Canada, who are now coming to Canada in their teens with little or no literacy in their first language. So the tools that we think of right away, like, oh, Google Translate. Well, if you have nothing to translate from, right? Where do you go from there? But that's a whole other presentation. But with Moises, right, there are tools that he can use, but I think a big part of that knowledge gap for that teacher would be understanding what can he do, and what are his goals and what are his limitations. And that kind of informs how they can engage with the class, with lots of students even being able to give nonverbal feedback. Do you understand? We do a lot of this in my class, right? Being able to engage in nonverbal feedback, or obviously, it seems like there's no deficit, or at least in this area of math. So he's able to share the answer, but knowing that being able to explain how you got somewhere. As a Canadian student, I found that difficult when I was doing math. I was a product of math makes sense. I had a really hard time. I was asked throughout my whole educational career, how did you find that answer? And I still struggle to explain that. So just having an idea of where he is at so that we can meet him where he's at. The other part is speech. Yes, exactly. Speech. Clearly enunciating speech. This is something that I'm sure many of us already do or were aware of, but it's really interesting how little we are aware of our own speech patterns, especially using colloquialisms and how quickly we speak. We love using sports metaphors, it seems, when we talk. I don't know if that is just a Saskatchewan thing, but yeah, there are so many ways that we speak, whether we are over intellectualizing our language or whether we are using colloquialisms or different sayings. I know a very common approach when it seems like someone does not understand us is just to say the same thing but louder. Right, when really it is about, well, what is a different way that I can try to communicate this? And as we saw in the video, that would have been, I believe, another gap maybe the classroom teacher wasn't aware of, because the speech was quite fast. The other part is observation. So as a group of people who work in education, I'm sure that we also can look at Moises and kind of see, okay, he knows the question, but you can see on his face when they ask, how did you get that? He's like, 40, I told you the answer, right? So just this idea of observing students when giving direction, because learning a language, you're taking risks. It can be scary. Many students are self-conscious, and if they can fly under the radar and not admit when maybe they don't understand something, it can be easy for them to fall through the cracks. So sometimes it's just, do they understand, or are they replicating the behavior of the students around them? I spoke to this a little bit already, but I think it's the most important thing, and probably what I find myself doing the most as an EAL teacher when I'm speaking with other classroom teachers is trying to separate learning objectives from language. So we know that material should be focused on a learning objective, and a valid assessment measures if the student can accomplish or meet that outcome. Obviously, in this scenario, word problems, of course, are very difficult, and there is a skill involved that students learn in the practice to be able to understand word problems and working in math. But in this case, it was the word block. It was one word that he needed further explanation on to be able to just understand and be able to attempt that question in a real way. So, any support that can be given to students to take away a language barrier that is keeping them from being able to meet that outcome in an equitable way as their Canadian peers or any of their classmates that speak English as their first language. So in this case, right, understanding what the word block meant, being able to explain that vocabulary or translate that word problem isn't taking away from measuring whether or not he can answer the math question. Of course, there will always be exceptions like English language arts. You are measuring someone's ability in some cases to read and comprehend and respond to writing. But there are many cases where learning objectives are not always separated from language, and then it puts EAL students just at an unfair advantage to their peers. And yeah, images. Of course, we know that making a connection with images, pictures, videos can help with students. iPads with translation apps, if you have students that are literate in their first language and are able to use that, are awesome. I love Microsoft Translate. It has a lot of languages that are not available on Google Translate. And yeah, there were anchor charts in the class that he was able to refer to, which was great. And sometimes it's as simple as seeing a picture of a grain silo to understand what it is that you need to do. And of course, just patience and compassion, right? Taking the time to understand students, to listen to students. We all, working in education, of course, have a lot on our plates, and sometimes it feels like we always are trying to do more and we just cannot do enough. But I think that one of the most important things that we can do is just trying to make a classroom environment where students feel accepted and they feel valued and they feel safe, because those are the environments where students will feel more comfortable advocating for themselves. Um, so EAL teacher specialists, what can they do? So of course, I've spoken to this already. We can provide background on students' language abilities, exam accommodations. So like I said, reading questions out loud, working in a quiet space. Many of our EAL students, they are like any other students. They have complex needs. So being able to work in a quiet space for whatever reason, right, for focus can be really helpful, or just writing in a comfortable space, especially if there might be anxiety around test taking, not having a lot of experience with test writing, because test writing is a skill. And if we haven't experienced maybe the full educational experience that some of our peers have, and we're writing a test for the first time, we won't necessarily have the skills that maybe a lot of us take for granted that we need to write tests. We can work with students on subject-related vocabulary with EAL tutorial support, provide suggestions for differentiating, and meeting with family, of course. So being able to engage EAL families in the learning process, because so often they are left out through language barriers or not cultural barriers, just not feeling familiar, maybe not feeling welcome, but reaching out and engaging EAL families so that we can talk and work together and supporting their children, because they're part of that community of practice, that community as well. Okay, so this is just a summary of everything that we've covered up to this point. I definitely am finishing a little bit early, but are there any questions that anyone has? Or we are like a room of professionals. So even if there is, I don't know, any personal experiences that anyone wants to share that they think connects to what we've talked about, yes. Well, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I yeah, your time is valuable and I appreciate that you spent it with me. So thank you so much.